Excellencies, dear friends, good afternoon to all of you, a good morning and good evening to those of you who are joining online, and welcome, a warm welcome to this event reflecting on 25 years of the WPS agenda, lessons learned from gender research and UN peace operations. Thank you to the Elsie initiative for Women in Peace operations led by Global Affairs Canada for supporting this event and supporting IPI's work on this topic since 2019. We would also like to thank our partners for today's event, the Stimson Center, the Latin American Security and Defense Network, and the Gender and Security Sector Lab at Cornell University. This month, as you all know, we mark the 25th anniversary of UN Security Council Resolution 1325, and we are at a turning point. As others seek to erase the gains made over the past 25 years, everyone in this room and on this panel is working hard to ensure that we not only sustain the progress made, but continue to implement the Women, Peace and Security agenda. The progress on uniformed women's participation in UN peace operations has been one of the most visible and measurable signs of WPS implementation. The research and collaborations emerging from the Elsie initiative have provided momentum by linking policy analysis to operational change and offering a blueprint for how we can implement and be accountable to our WPS commitments. Today's panelists and speakers will be sharing research documenting and analyzing barriers to uniformed women's meaningful participation in UN peace operations. However, and perhaps most importantly, they will share how their research can inform policies and interventions to overcome these barriers. And finally, this research reiterates the fact that uniformed women's meaningful participation in UN peace operations is not something that is simply nice to have, but in fact is central to the credibility and sustainability of peace itself. We're fortunate to have with us today an esteemed panel bringing together a range of perspectives spanning first-hand experience at the mission level and within the UN itself, as well as the critical insights of researchers who will share their findings on these issues. It's now my distinct honor to welcome Lieutenant General Mohan Subramanian, Force Commander, United Nations Mission in South Sudan, who will provide virtual opening remarks. Lieutenant General, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I begin with expressing my gratitude to International Peace Institute, particularly WPS IPI, Elsie Initiative, GSS Lab, Stimson Center, and RESDAL for getting together and making this event possible. It's a proud privilege for me to have been given this opportunity as a field practitioner of the WPS agenda to express a few thoughts as opening remarks in this wonderful event. 3.5 years of tenure as Force Commander UNMISS in South Sudan has virtually convinced me without doubt that, convinced me actually thoroughly, that women in peacekeeping make peacekeeping stronger, make it more holistic. They bring to play broadened skill sets. They enable greater reach into the communities we seek to serve, particularly the women and children in the community. They improve gaining of the community's trust by the peacekeeping missions. They improve early warning. They improve the efficacy of the community alert networks for alerting us on the imminence of physical or sexual violence threats. And they provide, in addition, a role that is often underplayed. They provide role models for women and children in the community to aspire to become like them and to get out of the predicament they are in and to try and soar to achieve something that the peacekeepers have. And then in addition, women in peacekeeping help prevent sexual exploitation and abuse better. All this is made possible because they bring, as I said, broadened skill sets and an ability to empathize with the sufferings of the women and boys and girls. Not that men do not have the same empathy, but it perhaps comes naturally to women. And therefore, women in peacekeeping are, or as it was said, it's not just a nice thing to be; it is the right thing to be ensured. Okay, now I'm completely convinced on this, and I can provide a number of examples from my practical experience over the last 3.5 years where this has tangibly mattered in terms of better impact of our peacekeeping initiatives, particularly of the force. Now, while this is established, there's a long way to go in achieving the objectives that are set out in the WPS agenda. 25 years has seen a lot of progress. Numbers have increased. Certain concepts have come into play. Facilitation of for women in peacekeeping to have a full, equal, and meaningful participation in all domains of peacekeeping. Have made progress, but there's a long way to go. There are miles to go. A certain in this, I think all of you in the audience today are all making a difference. The Elsie initiative is helping us this year with providing an enabling atmosphere and environment in terms of facilities, equipment, and kits for women peacekeepers. As you know, in South Sudan, as indeed in many other missions, we have bases in very remote areas and long duration patrols, which very often have to stay nights in the field virtually. So in all these places, because of the fact that there has been always a policy making through a male peacekeepers lens, quite a lot of requirements of female peacekeepers have not been factored in. Now these are being corrected, and we are being helped by LC Fund in doing that this year. We are getting over 10 semi-permanent relocatable ablutions, which will help women to be deployed in our remote bases as and when required. And there are portable showers pop up in the streets, 200 of them, portable toilets and shivis, a number of them. I think we will be much better off in terms of providing an enabling atmosphere to women when this procurement is done than ever before. I thank the LC initiative for it, and I assure you that from my practical experience of the last 3 years, this is going to be a game changer. Why? Because our primary objective here is protection of civilians. Protection of civilians from the threat of imminent physical violence, from the threat of immediate conflict-related sexual violence, from the threat of imminent cataclysmic effects of climate change, and to provide and to enable humanitarian assistance to reach the needy. Now, given that, when we say protection of civilians is our major task, we don't consider anybody who has picked up an arm or a weapon or who is aiding and abetting violence as a civilian. We are talking of hapless people caught in conflict, and majority of them are women. Now, if we have to protect these women and the mandate is centric towards this need, we can't have just few gender advisors in our headquarters and a few in the major formations and units to do this task. Gender affairs have to be built in everything we do, by every company commander, every battalion commander, every sector commander, every head of field office, every force commander, every mission leader, and by everybody. Gender consciousness as gender responsiveness cannot be relegated to a specific section called the gender protection cell. That's the change that we have to bring in, and we have made some changes in this regard. And there is no other leadership that will work in peacekeeping, as indeed in any endeavor in peace and security, which is not gender responsive. In fact, to call leadership as gender responsive is itself an indication of our thought process, which says there is some other type of leadership also which is effective. No, there isn't any other type of leadership. When you say leadership, it means gender responsive leadership. And but then I should also say, particularly from a military perspective, quite a lot of our directives, thought processes, concepts, SOPs have unfortunately been made without a view through the gender lens. And therefore, it is imperative for all leaders, like particularly I have a person in my office who sees everything that comes to me and then corrects it for a female perspective, a female peacekeeper's perspective. And so that's I feel I have grown to believe that that's a very important thing. And it's a job that it's a task that should have been done long ago, but better late than never. I will quickly take time to expose to the audience two major initiatives in our mission, which you may like to ponder over. One, in most of the peacekeeping missions, especially in Africa, prevention of conflict-related sexual violence needs to get greater prominence than it does now. Currently, our thought process goes like this. We try to take actions to prevent physical violence, which is our main endeavor, and especially in the tier 2 function of protection of civilians, which is providing physical protection. Now, in this sphere, we take as a spin-off or a byproduct the prevention of CRSV happening when we focus on physical violence prevention. That needs to change. We, in an environment where armed factions indulge in CRSV as the primary objective of their tactical operations, we cannot have peacekeepers not having customized operations to prevent CRSV. Therefore, in UNMISS, we have conceptualized a bouquet of tactical operations called PTCCs, Patrols to Combat CRSV. And that's a subject by itself. On some day, I'll appreciate an opportunity to discuss this with all of you like-minded stakeholders in WPS agenda. But suffice it to say now that that's a bouquet of operations which is customized to prevent CRSV in the time and space of application of these operations, in the composition of the members who constitute this operation, in which majority are women peacekeepers, and also in the manner in which we go about doing the task. So that's, I think, a best practice from us, which is worth being considered at the academic and scholarly levels to develop it further and to spread it around if it is worth it to other practitioners. We also have an initiative in this similar way in prevention of SEA, which is also women peacekeeper intensive. We have got about 28 bases in our mission which we occupy and which we are deployed in. In all these 28 bases, we conduct what is called the prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse audits every year. And in some of the vulnerable bases, we do it twice a year. And that's done on the basis of a mother document called the Force Commander's Directive on Prevention of SEA, which is sum total, a gist of all guidance that is available in the academic backdrop of peacekeeping on SEA. It's reduced into a checklist format, which is easier to understand, converted in the language that all RTCCs, troop contributing countries and countries, the contingents, police and military understand, and then applied as a directive to be followed without fail. And then every year we go and check the actual implementation of this directive and also identify risks for SEA and mitigate them before SEA is committed. Aim is not to just think about zero tolerance of SEA incidents, but to go towards zero incidents of SEA. This has also had some beneficial effects, which I would like to, and project. And the other initiative that I would like to say very in one sentence is initiated by the UN headquarters. We have a network for uniformed women in UNMISS. We were the pilot network. We have now expanded it to other missions also. And this is a very useful network, which has helped women across the board from multiple contingents. And in fact, there are 84 contingents women represented in that network, both military and the police. And they get together, share their views, share their challenges, share their concerns, share their problems, and then arrive at common agendas, which are then projected to the leadership, which interacts with this network periodically, and then a solution is found. I have found this to be a very useful initiative that has now taken place. So I will end here because the topic is very topical and of great interest. And without addressing the WPS agenda, I would say there can be no peacekeeping. WPS agenda successful implementation is this cornerstone or the center of any peacekeeping effort, especially when you want sustainable peace for a long period of time in the areas we serve in. So thank you very much, and I really appreciate this event, which commemorates a great day as well as allows us to reflect on how much we have done in the WPS agenda's implementation and how we will chart our way ahead together. So thank you for this opportunity, and I wish good luck for the event and really look forward to the outcomes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, General Mohan. It's so nice to have that field experience and the many examples you shared. Thank you also to Zaid, to our panelists, to everyone in the audience. For those I don't know, my name is Phoebe Donnelly, and I lead the Women, Peace, and Security program here at IPI. And our team has been envisioning this event for at least 3 years. As we thought towards the 25th anniversary, we thought this could be a moment in New York to celebrate the work and research that's happened related to gender and peace operations. So earlier today, I was at an event discussing the Elsie Initiative Fund and the projects they've funded within a diverse group of military institutions. This is part of an ecosystem of support for uniformed women's meaningful participation in peace operations. And today we're going to talk about another part of that ecosystem. So Global Affairs Canada also leads the Elsie Initiative. The initiative enables think tanks and research institutions to conduct research, have convenings like the one today, related to uniformed women's meaningful participation in peace operations. So just to flag how important that is to have that space, to have that support for these research initiatives and partnerships. Today, we have several other partners that work on research related to the Elsie Initiative. We're missing a few of the partners, Monash University and DCAF, but this group meets monthly to ensure that our research and convening is connected, it's shared, and it's building upon each other's work. So some of the partners here will be sharing about that research, but before we begin, I just want to also flag that IPI has been conducting its own research. Our work related to the Elsie Initiative focuses on 3 areas: analyzing gender bias within peacekeeping operations and devising strategies to decrease gender bias, examining ways to combat key barriers to women's meaningful participation in peace operations with a focus on sexual harassment, discrimination, and assault, and connecting researchers, practitioners, and uniformed women from across UN member states for collaboration on research and solution building, what we hope we're doing today. So you can find our latest publications online by the door. Just to flag, we have 2 coming out that might be of interest. One, General Mohan queued up nicely, is on gender advisors and their role within missions. And another one coming out soon is on peacekeeping intelligence. So I'll now turn to the panel. I'm going to ask each panelist an opening question. We'll have about 5 minutes per panelist. Then hopefully we'll have some Q&A from the audience here and the online audience. And then we'll have a wonderful closing by USG Sanders. So just to note, this event is being recorded. We have a virtual audience participating today, but if you want to go back and watch the event, it'll also be recorded and live on IPI's website. It will also be available in French. So we have French translation for our online audience. So without further ado, I turn to Ambassador Jacqueline O'Neill, former Women, Peace and Security Ambassador for Canada, Director, Global Affairs Canada. I want to ask you, as we've said, Canada has been a leader in advancing the Women, Peace and Security agenda through the Elsie Initiative. What are the most significant lessons that stand out from Canada's partnerships with troop and police contributing countries to address barriers for uniformed women?
Thanks, Phoebe. Good afternoon. Bon après-midi à tous et à toutes. You're very kind to still call me ambassador in Canada. We don't get to keep the title for life, very sadly. We envy our American colleagues in that dimension in particular, but I spent 6 years as Canada's ambassador for Women, Peace and Security, and then now oversee the Elsie Initiative, as well as a few other aspects of our Women, Peace and Security efforts from Global Affairs Canada. And I've had the great pleasure of working with many of you in this room on different aspects of women, peace, and security, the Elsie Initiative specifically, and others over the last, I guess we can now say 20-some-ish years. So thanks to IPI, thanks Phoebe and your whole team, and thanks to all of our other colleagues who are contributing today and joining online and in person. So as you mentioned, Phoebe Canada created the Elsie initiative in 2019. We were effectively just really tired of being at sessions and hearing about the importance of increasing the number of uniformed women in peacekeeping, and then everyone agreeing, and then the numbers never moving. So we really wanted to try creative things, try things as a pilot, test some boundaries, and push us all a little bit to think creatively about what could be done on this. So we created the initiative focused on research, advocacy, partnerships, and a range of other things. And we knew from the beginning that research needed to be at the core of this effort. And to date, we've produced or been associated with colleagues who have produced about 50 original pieces of research, 50 original pieces of research, which has been really, really important and leads me to the first answer to your question about what have we learned. I think one of the things that we learned is that we had been operating off of a lot of inaccurate diagnoses. So when you don't diagnose an issue correctly, you're not doing the steps to address it. So what do we mean by that? For a long time, we heard a number of reasons being told to us and kind of exchanged about why there were not more women in peacekeeping operations. And a lot of the time, what we realized is these were reasons that were sort of assembled by often larger groups, predominantly of men, sometimes of a few senior women around a table, who were basing it off their own lived experiences or basing it off of sort of what they saw from their perch at a senior level table. And I mean things like we were often hearing things like women simply don't want to deploy on the most dangerous patrols or to the most dangerous places. We were hearing things like women don't want to leave their families, women have family and care obligations that make it not possible or desirable for them to deploy or want to be part of UN missions. And through the MOIT barrier assessment, so this process of actually doing a reflective exercise within a security institution, a lot of the times those assumptions are inaccurate, and we find the opposite is the case, that women often very much do want to be deployed on the most dangerous deployments or patrols, for example. Some of the reasons that they don't are that they don't have the equipment that would make them lead them as safe as others or as physically healthy as others in doing so. Or they don't have information about what the conditions are like. So instead of saying, I don't want to deploy to a very difficult hardship situation, they were saying, I want to actually know more about it before I jump into this black hole. So it was a different thing. When Canada did our MOIP assessment, when we looked at our own barriers to women's deployment, we were trying to understand why many women were not putting themselves forward to go on UN peacekeeping missions. And some of the more senior commanders were saying, well, it's that women, simply don't want to, they're not volunteering for it. What we learned through the barrier assessment was that women were not aware of the opportunities, and commanders then said, well, the women, I have so few women in my formation, my battalion, my platoon, they're very, very valuable to me. I did not want to promote to them the opportunity of going to serve on a UN peacekeeping mission because I need them at home. So it was an information misalignment as opposed to an intention. So all to say, diagnosing the issue is essential before we can actually address it properly and making this alignment work, which is one of the reasons it was so important to us from the outset to ensure that all of the Elsie initiative research was public and that every country that did a barrier assessment had to make at least a significant amount of the findings public as well. So you can't get money, for example, from the Elsie Initiative Fund until you've done a barrier assessment, a reflection on yourself, using roughly the methodology that was developed by fellow researchers, and then agreeing to make a portion of it public so that we can learn from each other. That also in turn gives more foundation to local researchers to be able to understand the dynamics of what are often very, very closed institutions that release not even, in many cases, the highest level statistics on representation. So that's one area is that we had a lot of inaccurate diagnoses. The second thing that I think many of us have learned across is that many of the issues that need to be addressed are structural. They're not simply technical. What I mean by that are, again, we heard for a long time women need mentorship or they need specific training to be able to be to have the capabilities to serve or the motivation to serve. those are important things. Those are much more technical or sometimes easier, quicker fixes. Some of the biggest dynamics that affect women's representation are much more structural, much more systemic. They relate to stereotypes, ideas of what roles women should and shouldn't play as it relates to security, care responsibilities, sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment, and culture within organizations. And as we talk about culture within organizations, this is something that within Canada and our own armed forces, we've struggled with very deeply and have had a real kind of national reckoning with, I would say, particularly in the last several years. And as people say sometimes, well, what's the difference in this latest, the last couple of years that we've had a crisis and we're trying to address issues of sexual misconduct within our forces? What's the difference between now and various times before when we've had it in our national consciousness and then we haven't fully addressed it? And I would say one difference now is that we are diagnosing the problem more accurately. We used to talk about the problem was sexual misconduct. Now we've talked about the problem is abuses of power and a culture of abuse of power and challenges about what types of behavior the organization rewards as a whole, with sexual misconduct being part of a spectrum of abuse of power. And so the issues that are deeper, that are more systemic, that relate to the culture of institutions and organizations, these are equally important, much less easy to fix, much less, take much more time to fix, but are really, really also as foundational to dealing with some of the challenges as buying new equipment can be. I'll leave it there for now. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And you'll always be ambassador to me. Now to turn to my other side, Lisa Charland, who is Senior Fellow and Director, Protecting Civilians and Human Security at the Stimson Center. Lisa, the Stimson Center is in the middle of a project on gender responsive leadership. Can you share any early findings on the relationship between gender responsive leadership and women's meaningful participation in peacekeeping?
Great, thanks very much, Phoebe. The Stimson Centre is delighted to be here today in partnership with IPI, RESDAL, the Gender Security Lab, and the Elsie Initiative for Women in Peace Operations as co-hosts for this event. So as you mentioned there, at Stimson, we have been taking forward one of these research projects that is being supported by Global Affairs Canada through the Elsie Initiative. And this particular project is something we've been working on over the last 2 years or so, and it's ongoing. And the focus is on building evidence on how to frame and foster gender responsive leadership throughout UN peace operations. And we're doing that by attempting to clarify how the concept of gender responsive leadership can be translated into practice, assessing how gender responsive leadership manifests in mission settings, and analysing the approaches of other deploying organisations outside of the UN. And so as part of the project, we have been engaging in interviews with a range of current and former senior mission leaders. And in the months ahead, over the next sort of year or so, we will be publishing a number of the outputs as we start to conclude some of this research, including some reports, some videos, and various products, and making that publicly available to this community. In particular, I think it's worth noting before I go into a couple of the preliminary findings, and I will stress they are preliminary as we work through this, that part of the project has included a focus on mission case studies. So for instance, earlier this year, we were very grateful to the support of the UN peacekeeping mission in Cyprus to go out there and interview a number of the personnel across not only the uniformed component, but the civilian component and civil society to understand how they interpret and conceive of the idea of gender responsive leadership. And in fact, some of the team, we will be in the Democratic Republic of the Congo towards the end of October, continuing this research. And more recently in May, in looking at how not only the UN does this, but other organisations such as NATO, the EU and OSCE undertake their approaches, we convened a dialogue in Brussels. And really we've been drawing on two particular tools that I think it's worth highlighting because there's been a lot of excellent progress, I think, to codify what we expect when it comes to gender responsiveness from leaders. And as we heard from the general, good leadership or effective leadership should be gender responsive anyway. But first of all, that is the DPO policy, the Department of Peace Operations policy on gender responsive UN peacekeeping operations, which provides incredible detail on expectations across the mission and functional units when it comes to gender responsiveness. And then secondly, some of the work by the Folke Bernadotte Academy in developing a handbook on gender responsive leadership. So our goal at the outset, I think, was really to dispel two myths that we saw when we started developing this project idea about 3 years ago. The first is that gender responsive leadership is only applicable to women. And sometimes that, I think, has been an underlying assumption. And we're happy to say that that isn't necessarily something that we've seen come out from the research we've done to date, although perhaps people are a little bit better briefed when they know that we're coming to talk to them. And then the second one, I think, is that this is only about senior leaders in a mission. And this idea that leadership is much more extensive than that in terms of the components and the approach that we take to gender responsiveness. So I wanted to offer 3 reflections for the purpose of today's discussion and caution that these, again, are in the process of development. The first is that there are different views on how to approach gender responsive leadership in the current political environment in terms of the contribution of women to peace operations. Now, this really emerged in our conversation that we had in Brussels in May, when we convened representatives from NATO, the OSCE and the EU to discuss different organisational approaches to gender responsive leadership. And in some instances, we received feedback that people have been advised to downplay the issue of gender for fear of backlash in different political settings. One participant at the dialogue noted if we only use values-based framing, gender responsive leadership will not be resilient to political dynamics. And I think this has been an ongoing tension that many in the room who've worked on women, peace and security more broadly would recognise. This tension between, I think, the civil society conversation focused on sort of human rights and values, and then the one in security institutions, which doesn't necessarily ignore that, but is very much focused on what can this do for the types of operations we are seeking to undertake. The second preliminary reflection is that there is a risk that a heavy emphasis on gender parity may undermine more substantive gender responsive approaches and missions and sustainable approaches to women's meaningful participation. There is an undercurrent of backlash, at least, that we've started to observe in some of our conversations about recruitment processes and gender parity, with a view that women are simply put into roles because they are women. This does women a disservice when taking up a position. And it's probably reasonable to assume that this will continue to become more challenging as we see positions in UN missions cut and become fewer in number. And we really need to get ahead of this challenge. But it also highlights some of the challenges around framing on gender responsive leadership. Gender parity in assessing the number of women serving in a mission is often the lower hanging fruit in terms of assessing any form of progress. It's quantitative, but it doesn't provide the full picture. Let me be clear, increasing women's meaningful participation in peacekeeping is essential, but it's only one aspect of strengthening gender responsiveness. And we need to ensure that the metrics on gender responsiveness go beyond measurements on increasing the number of women in a mission. And this includes examining what it means for leaders to be gender responsive in the external implementation of their mandate as well. And I think this goes back to some of what we heard from the General about approaches to conflict-related sexual violence, patrols. This isn't just internal and human resources. This is external to implementation on the ground. And that seems to be an area that we need to push a bit further to bring up in the conversations we've been having. And then the final point, there is an ongoing need for accountability around gender responsive leadership to ensure women's meaningful participation is prioritised. Leaders need to recognise that they have a duty of care to personnel and need to respond to that. But it's also about challenging the way things have been done. And there is often a penalty for challenging the status quo, particularly for women. And that does not encourage an environment of responsible reporting and consequently appropriate responsive action. In many contexts, we've found that initiatives for gender responsiveness relies on individuals, personal values, and a sense of responsibility to their colleagues, mission personnel, and affected communities. And we've probably found less instances where there's been trust that the system is going to take this forward. And I think that's an area where, with the policies and tools that are available, emphasis on accountability is really key. Again, to bring up the concern of doing less with less, again, this may result in a more tokenistic approach to women's meaningful participation if we're not careful, and that is something we have to guard against. Supporting women's meaningful participation requires financial investment to create enabling environments that might include shorter rotations or facilities, and if they aren't viewed as a priority as part of peacekeeping, then there is an even greater risk that we'll have more backsliding. And as I conclude, this is probably an opportune time, and it probably doesn't need to be said to this audience, that, of course, gender responsiveness is not just about women. And if we are examining how to make peacekeeping more gender equal, then we also need to consider the impact of conflict drivers and power structures and security institutions as relates to men and their perceived roles in society. And that's relevant not just in terms of how a mission responds with its external mandate, but also in terms of the opportunities for those serving to have an enabling environment that supports gender equality. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you for giving us the preview of some of the research we will all be looking for soon. It's now my pleasure to introduce another one of our research partners, Elisa Real, who's a program coordinator for the Latin American Security and Defense Network, RESDAL. We wish Elisa was with us today. But Elisa, I want to ask you, RESDAL's working on research focused on how defense institutions address sexual exploitation, harassment, and abuse. How can national defense institutions better advance the goals of the Women, Peace, and Security agenda? And given your regional focus in Latin America, is there a role for regional solidarity in these efforts?
Thank you, Phoebe, and thank you very much for this opportunity. We would also like to thank our colleagues at Stimson and also our colleagues at Cornell and Ambassador O'Neill, Ambassador, and KAPTC and our colleagues from the GSSC lab. So as Phoebe stated, our current project is on our is regarding sexual harassment and sexual abuse, particularly how it is dealt within the military institutions and the security institutions, because what happens within peacekeeping missions does not happen in a vacuum. It is in fact a reflection of what is in fact normalized within the home, so to speak. So one of the things that we actually found that is very interesting is that national defense institutions in the global south have in fact made significant strides in advancing the WPS agenda, particularly by incorporating women into their ranks and leadership structures. This has happened thanks to a lot of top-down convincing, because as you know, the military structures, if you do not convince that every decision that happens within the military, it happens from the top down. It might take some time for the top ranks to decide that a course of action is the best one. They may deliberate on it, but once they have made a decision, that decision is going to reflect the rest of it. So that is a very important part to always to keep in mind with any sort of national defense institution. And that is sometimes reflected in what we see in protocols or in legislations or in whether or not a country has a WPS national action plan. So far, we have found in our research, which again, it's preliminary, I also would like to warn them, that a lot of the countries that we have been researching, they do have these sorts of legislations, they do have these sorts of protocols, and that does have a sort of reflection on how these issues are treated within these institutions. It might take some time to normalize them, but it is, in fact, something that is very important to keep in mind. And those that do not have, for example, I'm currently using an example, a national action plan on WPS, it kind of hinders the systemic integration of WPS principles into the military doctrine and planning, to quote our colleague Colonel Sharma from the United Service Institution of India. So these are things that should be kept in mind, and these the future of the WPS agenda should be codified all the more within the military structures. A major challenge remains in the perception that the WPS agenda is still primarily seen as a civilian or diplomatic initiative, which unfortunately underscores the importance of top-down engagement. That's why you need even more buy-in from the top down. Now, to get to regional solidarity, and I will hopefully not go over my 5 minutes, it plays a crucial role because the Global South does face similar institutional and cultural challenges, and regional platforms for peer learning, collaboration, and exchange of best practices can strengthen implementation of the WPS agenda. An example to give is that we have seen is that in spite of there being a backlash towards the WPS agenda or anything to do with women's rights being perceived, the Global South's defense institutions don't seem to have that sort of backlash. If anything, there is a strong willingness to engage, at least from the top perspective, to discuss on how to keep advancing the agenda and to understand how best to implement it within their own structures. These institutions largely recognize the importance of sustaining the WPS agenda. So what they seek now are practical guidance that are hopefully tailored to their specific contexts on how to apply it effectively. That's what makes regional solidarity, especially through through events where different institutions can collaborate, all the more important into achieving these goals. So those were some of our primary findings regarding this question. And I will leave you to it.
Thank you, Elisa. And just to plug, RESDAL has the Atlas of Defense Policies. I'm maybe not saying the full title right, but I would highly recommend where they really documented all of these policies. It's a wonderful resource. It's now my pleasure to turn to Roya Azidi, Assistant Professor, the Department of Political Science at the University of Rhode Island, and a Gender and Security Lab Research Associate. Roya, against the backdrop of increasing anti-gender backlash, how can academia strategically present evidence and work with policymakers in ways that strengthen political will and enhance women, peace, and security implementation?
Thank you so much, Phoebe, and the IPI team for inviting the Gender and Security Sector Lab today and for hosting. I've had the pleasure of working with the Gender and Security Sector Lab since 2021, and I've been involved in implementing the MOAB methodology in multiple countries, multiple security institutions. I would like to start with reminding everyone that in the last few years, countries around the world have witnessed a surge in militarization. From escalating geopolitical tensions and renewed interstate wars to persistent civil conflicts, the military and security forces' footprint in public life has expanded. Defense budgets are climbing, conscription is being renewed in multiple countries or extended across genders or lengthened in duration. On top of that, we have increasing involvement of military for domestic purposes. Yet even as global militarization intensifies, we see a worrying shift in priorities. And it's a move away from conflict management, including the highly important women, peace, and security agenda. This shift is deeply worrying and concerning. When attention and resources move away from peace building toward militarization, the predictable outcome, and this is according to scientific research, the predictable outcome is more war and conflict, fewer opportunities for conflict resolution, and higher human costs and casualties. Decades of rigorous academic research have shown that peacekeeping works. Hundreds of peer-reviewed studies show that peacekeeping operations reduce the likelihood of renewed conflict, save civilian lives, and create the space necessary for political solutions to take place. We also know from scientific evidence that women's inclusion strengthens peace operations. Missions with higher number of female peacekeepers are more effective, they improve local trust, they reduce misconduct, and contribute to more durable peace. And these are evidence-based findings grounded in data and field research. Now, in this moment of rising anti-gender backlash, the challenge for all of us is not only to not retreat from the WPS agenda, but to show that it works. And this is exactly where academia comes in. One way to enhance WPS implementation is translating this rigorous scientific evidence into the language that resonates with political priorities. For example, showing that women's inclusion is a matter of effectiveness and national security. At the Gender and Security Sector Lab, we have done this in practical ways. Our work uses cutting-edge social science methods to understand how and why women strengthen peacekeeping missions, not only by increasing their participation, but by transforming the culture, effectiveness, and the legitimacy of the security sector itself, and peacekeeping missions. To give you an example, the GSS lab have completed about 12 MOF assessments in 12 police and troop contributing countries in 10 countries. And our research process establishes the top persistent barriers to women's meaningful participation in each contributing country and in aggregate form across multiple security institutions. And those findings can map directly onto future mission models to show where gender responsiveness raises effectiveness and where lack of it stalls reforms. We also quantify what works. For example, when it comes to misconduct prevention, across more than 4,000 uniformed personnel that the Gender and Security Sector Lab has surveyed, we find that pre-deployment SCA training was actually associated with stronger compliance in attitudes. So these are evidence-based findings, and they make an evidence-based budget case for, say, scaling training and enforcement. And we have seen what works, what that looks like in practice too. To give you another example, so in Liberia, the Armed Forces of Liberia implemented the MOF assessment in 2022. And since then, the number of women in the AFL has nearly doubled. During a follow-up interview with members of the AFL in July 2025, one senior officer explained this change, and I'm quoting, "We realized that if we want more women, we cannot expect them to walk in with the same preparation as men. The pre-training gives them a fair chance." Our GLOBE, which is our Future of Peacekeeping Needs Everyone report, which will be available outside the door if you're interested to grab one, also highlights how peacekeeping missions are evolving to take on different models. But we use scientific, rigorous research to show that no matter what form peacekeeping missions take in the future, women are integral to their success. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Roya, and thank you for flagging that point of translating the research. I think that's extremely important. It's now my pleasure to turn to another speaker who we also wish could be here in person, but we're glad to have her virtually, Joanna Osei-Tutu, the Deputy Director of Women, Youth, Peace, and Security at the Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Training Center. Joanna, we'd like to ask you from a training and capacity building perspective, what practices or training methods have proven most effective in preparing peacekeepers to integrate gender perspectives across all of their work, as well as what gaps remain? What can we all be doing better?
Good morning from my side. I'm currently in Australia, so it's a bit early here for me. So good morning, and thank you also very much for the opportunity to speak. I think today I'm wearing two hats, one for KIPTC and also one for Monash University, where I also support with the Elsie initiative project, where we look at care responsibility of peacekeepers. But both of them, again, it has to do with training and capacity building. So I think I can speak on both of my hats. So one of the things I think we've realized with the work that we've done at KIPTC, especially with the Ghana Armed Forces, I think the Ghana Armed Forces was the first country, one of the first countries under the MOWIP to undertake an assessment, undertake the MOWIP, and we were the pilots actually to contextualize the MOWIP, and then after the undertaking the MOWIP, Global Affairs, where we work with Global Affairs to now translate those barriers that we identified into initiatives and then run out those initiatives over the past 3 years. And I think one of the things that we learned from that activity was when it comes to training and when it comes to issues of gender and trying to mainstream or include a gender perspective into that, drawing case studies from the mission field. And what we mean was one of the best things that we did was engaging personnel. We actually did, and I remember we toured all the garrisons of the Ghana Armed Forces, engaging with personnel from senior management all the way down to the personnel on the troops, both civilian and uniformed personnel, speaking to them not as a training, but as an engagement where we try to get them to speak about how do you see gender from different perspectives, from the cultural perspective, from in the field, from your own experiences. How has it been for you in mission? How has it been for you in country? How has it been for me from the home? And what has been the challenges? What has been your experience with the word gender? What has been your experience with the word women, peace, and security? And how has it resonated with you? It is one thing to assume everybody understands these dynamics and these concepts, even at senior management level. But it is another thing to ask them to speak to you how it has impacted their lives throughout their careers and over the past 5 or 10 years. And I think, as Elsa said, for some, it is seen as driven by diplomatic and donors. For some, it is seen as driven by their government and also much by the armed forces themselves. So it was a good experience to listen to them on the field and listen to them from the ground and to draw the case studies that many, especially for the younger ones who are just new in the field, in the force, to hear from the older ones who have had more peacekeeping experience and to hear how having women and men both in the missions, what are the benefits that comes from that? And that experience sharing, I think, was something that resonated more and drew the message further in than anything that we would have said standing there talking about equality and equity and gender mainstream and gender responsive training and gender leadership and all the different terminologies. Having that dialogue and that open conversation with personnel and having senior officers also in the room. Some of the conversations were held under trees, as open, as frank, and as say what you want to say. I remember we kept telling the senior personnel with us, anything they say, I'm the civilian leading it. And I think having a civilian also facilitating gave the personnel the freedom to speak. And many of my colleagues were not in uniform. So the uniform personnel were at the back. We stood in front and we asked them, listen to your people speak, listen to them and hear what they have to say about this process. And one of the things that we came out of that training and out of those engagements was the Ghana Armed Forces, after all these conversations, was willing to actually give their personnel a paternity leave, which we embedded within the gender policy that we drafted for them last year and was adapted. So that when we initially spoke about having a paternity leave for male personnel, I remember senior management said, "Oh, we can't do that. That's too much." The thinking, "Oh, it's not." No, we don't think it's needed. But after going through all the garrisons and after having that conversation and listening to the personnel speak, and both men and women saying, "We think our men need it," and women saying, "Yes, it's needed for us. It will be good for our own mental well-being. It's good for us to have that time away." When we're drafting the gender policy for the Ghana Armed Forces, we put in the issue of having paternal leave. It went through the hierarchy, it went through, and we defended it. We gave them evidence, as she said, we gave evidence from empirical evidence. This is what was said. These were the quotes that came from it, and it was finally accepted. So having that personalized conversation and not just giving terminologies was a very good, effective way that we felt was a way of training and in terms of gender. The other thing that we also learned, and I think it's something that's also been said by the lieutenant, the force commander from South Sudan, is the issue of letting the conversation not just be about women. And it's about addressing the resistance and the cultural barriers. Yes, not all individuals are going to be welcoming to gender integration. It's an unknown field. It's a black abyss you're throwing people in. So it's about having that engagement and that inclusivity and allowing people to feel safe in the conversation that they're going to have. But it's also about engagement and not exclusion. And I think for a long time, for some people, the issue about WPS or about women's inclusion has just been about women's inclusion and not the benefit it has for the armed force or the force. So having that conversation that goes beyond women, but more about how does this benefit the force? How does this benefit the peacekeeping? How does this benefit the community? How does it benefit you and I as colleagues in the field? That when we are in the field together, we are able to depend on each other and tap on each other and say, I need help, and me being present is important. And I remember when my colleague and I were in Central African Republic and in DR series last year as part of the Monash care responsibility. I remember one male personnel saying that having care responsibility as a man is something that my force didn't understand. But now having this Elsie, like he said, having all this women conversation, that's how he put it, having all this women conversation, and it's being seen as a women issue. Now they are talking to us. But before, nobody will ask us about whether I'm a father. I have children. I have aging parents. I care about them. When I'm in the mission, I worry about my children. I worry about my family back at home. But it's assumed that I should be fine. I'm a man. But when I'm deployed in some of these areas that are remote, my ablution site wasn't a concern for many people. Once there's a structure, it's assumed as a man, I should be able to function. But now all of a sudden, they're worried about the ablution sites are not conducive for women. So now ablution sites are looking nicer. So yeah, I support the initiative. That's how one man put it. It's like, yeah, I like it. So he sees the benefits of having this conversation. But when we wasn't done in that sense, when that open conversation where we silo it, there will be resistance. But when we have the dialogue of inclusivity and we make people begin to see the wider benefit of these conversations, I don't think yet I've seen the change of attitude from a lot of our uniform personnel. There's a colonel, now a general, who when we began having these conversations about the Elsie initiative, he and I used to knock heads. And I remember one point I said, and I can say, and I remember once I told my sister, respectfully, I need to do my job. You need to do your job. We need to find a compromise. You are protecting your institution, but we need to find a way to better your institution. And now when I sit back and I hear him speak, I'm like, you actually project this better than I'm projecting it. I think you are more of an advocate than I am at this point. So it is about allowing people to air out their grievances, air out their fears, air out their uncertainties in a way that is healthy and a safe space, and then finding the common ground in it. The other thing that I think has also been said by the force and everybody is about leadership. The military is a very hierarchical institution. And for us to be able to get personnel to understand, it has to come from the top down. We can't do, there has to be commitment from the top consistently. And I remember when we started the Ghana Armed Forces, especially, we had a cadre for the senior management, and it's included the CDEs, the service chiefs, and all his senior management. There was a full 2 days with them. And to have these people sit for 2 full days, and I know what it costs. But we had to have that conversation with them. We had to have that engagement for them to understand what we wanted to get across for everyone. And to the point where the Armed Forces actually appointed a gender advisor to the CDS. And that was the commitment of the Armed Forces saying, we support this, we agree to it. And it's a show in the system where leadership sets the example and everybody follows through. And I think one of the things also me as a civilian learned over the time with working with the Armed Forces better is that hierarchical system has to be respected, it has to be appreciated, and you have to find a way in trying to integrate the system and appreciate what it means and also work better with them in a way that goes forward. And I think lastly, we talked about leadership, talked about how to work with resistance, the institutional gaps. But I think moving forward, we need to begin to shift away from just awareness to accountability. We've done a lot of awareness, the numbers, the awareness, but how do we ensure with all that we are implementing, we are taking accountability? We are tracking the impact, we are tracking the all that we are putting into this. How are we embedding it into it with performance indicators, with after work, with after action reports? It needs to go just beyond awareness. We need to go beyond just advocacy to accountability and to making sure that all that we are doing, there's a system to track and see the progress going forward. So I think I'll leave it there for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing those very real challenges that I'm sure many of us can relate to. It's now my pleasure to turn to Colonel Roger Nielsen, Counselor and Military Advisor, Permanent Mission of Sweden to the United Nations. Colonel, how can national militaries better integrate research recommendations to ensure progress on advancing the WPS agenda remains sustainable?
Thank you so much. And I will try to use Sweden's way to implement the Women, Peace and Security and research to increase our own operational effectiveness and credibility from these, make some recommendations how we can use it even further in the UN operations also. First of all, our national strategy on implementation resolution 1325 in the WPS is based on the insight that gender equality is created where resources are distributed, decisions are made, and norms are created. We are now into the 4th National Action Plan, which covers 24 to 28. In the armed forces, we have integrated the National Action Plan into strategic plans by estimate effects and goals to achieve, increased ability to take Resolution 1325 into account in all phases of operations. Institutionalization, but gender and resolution perspective should not be extra. It should be an integral part of structures, routines, doctrines, and education. Cooperation with civil actors and authorities to ensure that the right protections and participation for women and girls in arises in conflicts. Knowledge base. Research and studies will continuously contribute to identify obstacles and opportunities, as well as developing tools and methodologies. And finally, leadership and cultural change. The senior managers clearly shows commitment and support that norms are questioned and changed where necessary. So some recommendations from this. Dag Hammarskjöld once said, peacekeeping is not a job for soldiers, but only soldiers can do it. But what does that mean today in this environment? Sweden, like most TCCs, we have one set of forces. Those are based for warfighting capabilities in all aspects. But the same forces we use for all types of operations, including peace operations. And their forces will always be part of an integrated force of civilian police and other actors to solve the mandates or the mission given. Today's and tomorrow's conflict areas, it doesn't matter if it's a battlefield or it's a peace operation, they have one demand. It's to adapt quickly to overcome whatever happens in the field. This is also stressed by the people's perception and expectations. It doesn't matter if it's Swedish citizens or local people on the ground in a host nation during peace operation. To meet these challenges and get the best possible mix of people in our armed forces, we have the same core values and code of becoming, no matter. Since mission command is our philosophy, we strive for a result-driven and well-informed culture based on mutual trust and respect. Here, for example, we have used national studies and research from Uppsala University, the Swedish Defense Research Agency, to design training courses and to change how we make decisions in all different aspects. We use gender-neutral demands based on the warfighting tasks and capabilities for all our personnel. To reach, maintain, and keep these up to date, we use a combination of research combined with practical experience based on lessons learned from operations, training, and development. This has led to an increased number of female personnel and more mixed force contribution, raising the operational effectiveness. To optimize national pre-deployment training to prepare for UN peace operations, SWEDINT, our National Peacekeeping Training Center, together with the NC and GEM, the Nordic Center for Gender and Military Operations, is an active party in many corporations to collect and share both information and research. But nationally, they are responsible for analyzing and adapting these findings for the pre-deployment training for peace operation, but also to recommend changes in all other types of operations, including warfighting, if deemed actually contributing. Sorry for the not being able to speak here. Within today's peacekeeping from ANSO, for example, to hybrid missions like Haiti, there is an increased need for finding ways to quicker integrate research and lessons learned into best practice. This based on a common situation understanding between member states and the United Nations. Here, research and studies can provide scenarios for integrated planning and actions to adapt our missions and capabilities. One recommendation for UN peace operations is to better coordinate the existing structures frameworks and resources within the UN, regional and other actors. The incoming UN Action Plan for Women, Peace and Security, not being the correct name, but coming in, if that contains also strategic effects and goals for all different needs within the UN, that will be a good tool to support the future coming things. The plan can also be supported more in the implementation if a function, like for example the NC and GEM, or if forming a joint integrated working group with the resources within UN today to execute this plan. Another recommendation is to use different group of friends initiated by the member states. They could analyze and come up with recommendations on how to change and adjust UN ways and procedures, but also the adaptation within the member states. One example of a planned event in this one is between the IPI and a group of friends on prevention of SCA by uniformed peacekeepers. We intend to use the latest report from IPI and discuss with the members best practices on pre-deployment training to deduct activities or recommendations for change in procedures. Coming back to how national militaries better integrate research recommendations to ensure progress on advancing WPS agenda remains suitable. Like I said, most member states, we do have one set of forces. How we train them, how we equip them, there will be differences because of culture. There will also be differences because of that we have different security solutions in the regions. But our experience is that participation in the UN peace operations and integrating research through your national lessons learned process, that will have an added value. It will make the UN more operational, effective and credible, but there's no contradiction to your own operational needs, including to our experience, including warfighting. And I would like to summarize, but I listened to all the speakers before. All the things you have heard is actually the same experience we have. And I've been here for more than 35 years, so I have a long time in the Swedish Armed Forces and in national deployment. But to summarize, I think it's one set of forces, you have to adapt, but like stressed so many times before, you need the research and information so you have something to discuss in that way. That is also one thing which we also have special focus on when we do the pre-deployment training to mention. We always do integrated and combined events and exercises. It's a natural thing. We don't differ between gender and other things when we do the pre-deployment training. And cultural awareness. We have a special focus in the cultural awareness when we deploy. And then it's not just the cultural awareness for the local people in the region where you deploy. It's actually cultural awareness within the mixed multinational unit you're participating in. I participated quite a few joint ventures and combined exercises and operations, even with neighboring countries. But when it comes to these things, we do have cultural changes. And now I'm looking forward to the questions.
Thank you so much. So now it's our chance to turn to the audience. We're going to do a couple of questions at a time. I think we'll only have time for one round of questions. Please keep your questions very, very concise. My colleagues are floating with a mic so that we can, the online audience can hear. So show of hands for anyone who's willing, ready, able. Oh, you choose Sanders. Yes, put it on the table.
Thank you all for some really, really thought-provoking interventions. This question is really for Lisa. In your research, you said, I mean, you were somewhat hopeful and you said that people knew more about this issue and their responses were basically better than you expected. My experience is that they are well prepped before such interviews. And they have learned the need to speak very eloquently on these issues. But then what they say is often missing in practice. So as part of your research, how do you determine whether or not somebody's speaking frankly, to you. And then to move towards what Joanna said, really, how do we then move that more towards accountability and ensuring that people do indeed walk the talk?
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, once, twice. Oh, Anna.
Hello, this is Ana Garcia from the Department of Peace Operations. I lead the team that coordinates the Uniform Gender Parity Strategy. So of course, for us, this conversation is very, very relevant. I just wanted to start by saying that I think this room and the colleagues in the audience really reflects for me what the WPS agenda is about, which is a partnership. And I'm very glad that we have the opportunity to work together, member states, academia, civil society, the UN, and many others. Most of the recommendations we have heard, I wanted to mention that they really align with the priorities that DPO, the Department of Operational Support, and the Department of Management have identified for the Uniform Gender Parity Strategy for the next 3 years. So we will have a strong focus on gender-responsive leadership, promoting meaningful participation, in particular access of women to all roles, and working on enabling environments. And we would like to thank the Elsie initiative for the support provided to a recent review of the implementation of the strategy that really has identified these priorities. So perhaps I have 2 questions for the group. One for Lisa. We are very interested in any research on metrics for gender responsiveness. This is something we would like to also better measure internally in the UN. So any insights that you have already on how those metrics could look like would be helpful. And then for the Milad Nilsson, thank you very much for your words. So any other ideas that you have for the UN and member states to work more closely together, I would be interested in your views on that as well.
Great, thank you, Anna. Okay, our last question, Nina.
Hi, thank you very much for all of those remarks. On the question that's been raised by several on the issue of accountability, my question is, from my own experience, you know, this is a long-standing discussion between where do the national boundaries for responsibility for discipline with their personnel intersect with UN responsibility, including whether you have in situ boards of inquiry so that local witnesses can participate, and the difficulty of following up court proceedings in other countries. Do you feel that we've progressed? I mean, I still think of myself as a UNer, but do you think that the system has adequately head-on grappled with this issue and sorted it out and tried to be more creative in things as essential? I personally feel in situ boards of inquiry so that witnesses can participate and you don't have delays is probably one of the most critical things you could do. And it did happen in the early days in UNIFIL. So that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we put a few questions on the, okay, we'll take one last question briefly. Oh, Catherine, we've got a lot of our UN and former UN colleagues.
So thank you for the panel. I just wanted to maybe give an idea of approaching differently with the TCCs and PCCs, because I know that we go to the Ministry of Defense, for example, or the Ministry of Interior to have those contingents. But I think that it would be good to also involve the Ministry of Gender from those host countries. They have no idea when we are calling for those nominations. So, and it shows also from the questions today that we tend to separate uniform and civilian personnel. And I keep stressing, please, the ones that are really going deep in remote areas are the colleagues in uniform, because they are patrolling, etc. But the ones that really know how to engage the communities are the civilian senior gender advisors in peacekeeping missions. So when we are thinking about trainings, etc., we should combine both so that they understand, because otherwise, if you have a room with only uniformed personnel that are trained, when they go back to the field, they won't listen at the civilian because we create this delinking. So please, 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 let's have it as a voilà, really as a I mean something one thing.
Yeah,
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you. A lot put on the table. So we're going to go in reverse order, asking our panelists to respond in 1 minute, lightning round. Any of those questions or anything fellow panelists have said. So starting with Colonel Nielsen, 1 minute, go.
Thank you so much, and for good questions. And to quickly summarize, what I'm integrated, that is what I'm missing sometimes here. Yes, as a military man, I know what I have to do, etc. But I do feel, like I said, the gender advisor, for example, you have to start on the mission level integrated. So you discuss what it means, and in that case, you can support each other and show good examples. And then it goes back to, once again, I was here last year and there was a similar speech about operational experience and efficiency and giving examples. And I think that is what you have to do. Concrete examples, information, meet people in discussions, and for all leadership, no matter if it's military, civilian, police, ownership. Ownership comes from above. It's your responsibility always pull through this one. And at the same time, from bottom up, build from the beginning. Make everyone, when you join, no matter what organization, these is their core values. This is the code of conduct. This is how you act if you see something which is not correct. That's simple ways. But I think we have to be honest and broaden our minds, because I'm still having impressions. We still have things to do back home in Sweden. But I still think sometimes, just being here a year, that we are too stovepiped still when we go into the UN and discuss UN and the member states. That was why I really foresee we have to do other steps to learn together and to achieve together. And yes, WPS, I have seen it works better and better. But when it works better, you will have more cases reported. And I think that is also a part of the realism. Don't be afraid of that. That's another way of evolving. So if we are successful, we will have increased numbers, because then you have a climate where people actually report things.
Thank you. Joanna, 1 minute to you.
Thank you very much. I think I would end by saying that when I speak about accountability, when I speak about going forward, I think for me, looking at our, whether it's civilian or whether it's military, whether it's police, about the training, it's not just about awareness, like I said, but it's about thinking through a gender perspective at all times. And so what I would advocate for, I think we started with the armed forces in Ghana, is at every stage of your training, you have this gendered perspective in our trainings. That immediately you enter academy or recruit school, every training you do has gender integrated. It's not an add-on. It's not something we do after everything is done. It's not after we've gone to the shooting ranks and we've gone to the map reading, we've done situational analysis and everything else. Then we say, oh, the gender component. From the beginning, you enter academy, from the beginning, you enter recruit training. We know that throughout your training, from beginning to end, everything we do, there is a gender perspective, there is a gender lens, there's a gender scope in everything that we are doing, and we are training our personnel. So whether you are in country or whether you are UN in a peacekeeping operation, that lens is there. I think now most people think of a gender initially, most people thought of a gender perspective when they're in the UN mission, because that's when a lot of the trainings were done. But in mission, in country, there was a disconnect at times. And so there has to be that connection of wherever you are, that lens, and that's where the accountability starts, what you think throughout. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Roya.
All right, I would like to use my time to address one of the questions that was about whether we've made progress. I think we have definitely made progress when it comes to, as Ambassador O'Neill mentioned, diagnosing problems. So if you look at the MOAB methodology, it actually captures 10 different issue areas, from barriers to recruitment to deployment criteria, peacekeeping experiences, post-deployment experiences, social norms, and many others. And within each issue area, MOAB addresses dozens of topics. So it's a very robust tool to diagnose problems. So I think we have definitely made progress in that. But I think to ensure accountability, or ensuring accountability requires continuity of this research or data collection across time and space, meaning more security institutions need to undergo the assessment, but then we shouldn't leave those security institutions that have already undergone assessment alone. Like we should maybe do follow-up studies and make sure that the reforms that were recommended in the MOAB reports are actually being implemented. Thank you.
Thank you. Elisa.
I will try to be fast. Phoebe, please time me. So I will also answer the one about accountability and on progress. As Commander Nielsen said, one of the signs that there has been progress is that there are more reports happening, because that shows that there is in fact a trust in the mechanisms and a trust in the institutions that it will in fact take over the issue. So that in itself, the fact that there are reports, as jarring as it can be, is in fact a very good sign. There are some issues, namely in the issue of how sometimes institutions don't talk to each other as much as they should, or there should be more talk about it. And if you will forgive this shameless plug, we will in fact have a webinar where we address that with the UN's Conduct and Discipline Department on such an issue, where one of the issues that we have seen is that maybe more ministries of defense and ministries of interior need to directly talk to these departments and have engaged with them much more. But also, the other issue is that there needs to be more training and deployment where this is normalized. One of the things that we noticed in the MOWIP when we did in Uruguay as the surveyors is that the people who did go to peacekeeping operations that felt the most comfortable, when they were asked if something happens to you, what do you do? And they answered, "Oh, well, I immediately go up and say to my chain of command, and if your superior is the one who is doing things to you, then I go beyond that and follow the chain of command." That sort of certainty was one of the things that would probably help in the reporting mechanism.
Thanks,
so it requires pre-deployment. So yes, thank you
so much.
That's
Elisa.
1 minute.
Lisa, over to you.
I'll be very brief. First of all, USG Saunders, absolutely agree. There are a lot of limitations with the research. One thing I will say is we can't do research like this if missions aren't willing to let us come and talk to people. And we are very grateful for that support and very thankful to senior leadership who has done that. But one of the challenges is the first question you'll often get is, what are the research questions you want to come and ask? And so that prepares the ground. So that is a limitation, but I think we really go in a lot of the research, and I think other partners here do this as well, is not attributable. We're not there to get people or catch them out. We're there to understand what the gaps are so we can make things and improve them. And I think in terms of validating what we're trying to do, we try to triangulate and talk to civil society and undertake desktop research and try and assess, is the picture we're getting read out accurate? But I will say there will always be a limitation there. And I think, we can learn from others how we can get around that a little bit further. And then very quickly on metrics, Anna, excellent question. A few quick things. More examples that we have of what people are doing in good practice and highlighting it. We're very interested in how does this differ in kinetic settings versus more heavily civilian settings? And does that mean gender responsiveness looks different? And particularly, what is the role of the gender advisor and how does the senior leader rely on them, I think is something else. So just a few things to throw out there quickly.
Thank you, Jackie.
Accountability is the next step in all of this and getting very serious about it. Are we where we need to be? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And how do we know that? By the experiences that are documented of women peacekeepers on deployments, and the fact that they are still experiencing what they're experiencing. And we are seeing such little accountability of commanders and senior leaders on that front. We have definitely made progress. I think the UN actually has progressed and set standards in many ways that need to be implemented, but that are there. I worry a lot about hybrid mission, multinational support missions, where you see them being set up and processes for these complaints and resolution of complaints and consequences are still not in place even as troops are deployed. That's huge. And what do we know about accountability? One, it has to affect people's career progressions or career opportunity. We have to build it into performance evaluations. You have to experience a constraint in your career if you are terrible at this, if you ignore it, and the converse, if the opposite, if you implement it, and then linking it to money. And the Elsie Initiative Fund pays a premium for gender strong units. We were trying to use a positive incentive financially to do so. Is there the opposite? Is there a stick to go with the carrot where if you're terrible at this, do you experience consequences? We're not there yet. And maybe that's where we need to go next.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to have to close us out Under Secretary General and the Special Coordinator on Improving the UN Response to Sexual Exploitation and Abuse, Christian Sanders. Please come to the mic. Thank you so much for being here and closing out the discussion today.
Thank you, Phoebe, and hello, everyone. It's an honor for me to bring today's forum to a close, and thank you to the organizers, to our excellent panelists, and to all of you, whether you're here in New York or elsewhere in the world, for your interest and for your contributions today and every day in moving the dial on equality. We need your commitment now more than ever, along with that of millions of others, if we're going to make truly meaningful and transformative progress on the women, peace, and security agenda. We should celebrate the many hard-fought achievements of the last quarter century. Civil society and women's groups have eked out progress on domestic violence and femicide and pursued justice for sexual assault and other abuses of power. Commitments backed by concrete investments like the Elsie Initiative, so thank you, Canada, have expanded. Women's participation and leadership in peace operations, the organizations like those here today who have provided us with evidence that is essential if we are to create effective policies and demand action from our leaders. Nonetheless, it is clear to me, as it will be to all of you, that we're not progressing fast enough nor on enough fronts. And all our progress is still but a drop in the ocean when compared to the scale of the problem. When compared to the global backlash against women's rights and gender equality, the escalating geopolitical divisions, militarization, and arms proliferation that day by day erode the mechanisms that make progress on WPS agenda possible, and to the tidal wave of funding cuts that have slashed programs and placed communities at much greater risk. The levels of conflict-related sexual violence worldwide are monstrous. Most of all, our progress has failed to rectify women's ongoing exclusion from power, decision-making, and leadership on matters of peace and security. As we look to the future of the WPS agenda, we're going to need to fight harder on many fronts, including to break the glass ceiling and to expand women's participation and leadership across the board, and in particular within the security services. Notably, the ongoing review of UN peace operations is an opportunity to move beyond the rhetoric and to consider how WPS can be better put into practice. We also need to shift power to local communities, and in particular to women's organizations, because the people closest to the issues are also those best placed to solve tangible solutions. In short, we need participation as much as we need protection. Without both, we will fail to achieve the peace that many of us crave. Most importantly, we have to stop involving women in international peace and security only as victims of sexual violence in need of protection, or through a stereotypical lens depicting them as innately kinder, gentler, and more peace-loving than men. What we need instead is a sustained, genuine commitment to women's role as decisive actors, leaders, and agents of change. The peace in the Women, Peace and Security agenda is much more than the absence of war. It means the creation of a world where women and girls are free from sexual violence, where they live in dignity and equality,
and where they have full and meaningful participation in public life, where they are free to help build a better world for us all. I want to conclude by sharing a couple of lines from a statement that I came across this morning on LinkedIn. It was written by Annie Modi, and some of you may know Annie Modi. She's a peace-building expert from the DRC. And she wrote, a quarter of a century after UN Security Council Resolution 1325, the promise of transformative change for women in peace and security remains painfully unfulfilled. I've seen that women's contributions to peace are not abstract ideals, but concrete life-saving interventions. Women are not just witnesses to peace, they are its architects. Our collective responsibility is to turn promises into measurable change. The future of sustainable peace depends on it. And I couldn't have said it better myself. So thank you.
What a great way to close this event. Thank you so much, USG Sanders. Thank you to our panelists, both virtual and in person, and thank you to our audience. Enjoy the rest of your day.